I think philosophy lends itself well to being read multiple times, to being read through different focal lenses. Like, think about form, think about argument, think about history and politics and like the context that it's coming from, and read it again and again, and don't feel like you have to understand everything on your first reading or your second reading or your third reading. Like, just spend time away from the text thinking about what's going on, thinking about the questions that are asked. When Descartes asks you to close your eyes and imagine that, the external world doesn't exist, freaking close your eyes and imagine. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So if you don't know who I am, my name is May and I make videos on philosophy and poetry and literature. And as a result of making a couple of philosophy videos that happen to get picked up by the algorithm, a lot of you guys have found me through my Jean-Paul Sartre video and my Q&A on studying philosophy. And a lot of you have left me comments and DMs asking, how do I read a philosophy text? Like, I am not a student of philosophy, or I'm about to be a student of philosophy, and I don't know how to read philosophy. Like, what do I do? How do I read it? And that's like such a difficult question, and there's like no easy way to answer it because everyone has a different opinion. It's literally just deep diving into someone else's brain, and a lot of the time philosophy is freaking unreadable. Like, it's so difficult to read, and philosophers are generally not the best writers. I mean, some of them are amazing writers, like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Camus. It was just amazing, but most philosophy that you're going to encounter, whether that's at university or in your personal life, is not going to be the most readable. And so these are just some ideas that might help you analyze a philosophy text or just read it a little bit better than you might have if you haven't studied philosophy before. So I hope that it helps, but by no means take this as like an authoritative guide. So the first thing I think that you can do to set yourself up for greatness and to set yourself up to really have a solid understanding of what's happening in a philosophy text is to read the introduction. I say this about literally every book you could possibly read. Read the introduction. It's filled with information. It's written by someone who really understands what's going on, like way more than me or you or anybody else, maybe even more than your lecturer. Your lecturer is probably taking notes from the introduction of the book that you're reading. So read the introduction. If the book that you're reading doesn't have an introduction, that's probably because it's not a great publication, or it's not a publication that is meant for close reading. It's not very academic, essentially. So two really great publications that you can almost always guarantee will have a great introduction and a really good translation of the text are Oxford and Cambridge. Obviously, are two really great publishers. They're academic publishers. They get people who are experts in the field to write their introductions, and I guarantee you, if you read either of these two books, or if you read anything from these series, they're probably going to be really good. One example, and I'm not hating on Penguin because I love Penguin in so many ways, but one example of a publication that won't have the best introductions are the Penguin Great Ideas series. Like, these are literally just little snippets. There's no guarantee that the translation in here is going to be good or even well explained. There's not a great notes section at the end or a bibliography. So those are the kind of texts that you don't want to be picking up to read if you are planning on close reading the text, or if you really want to gain like a genuine understanding of what's going on. I'd recommend Oxford or Cambridge or Penguin's Classics. Penguin's Classics are really good. So as a starting point, read the introduction. That's always going to help you out. Obviously, there are so many online sources. There are so many lectures available for free online. There are so many videos being made by people who have spent a lot of time thinking about the text and maybe have had access to more resources than you have had. For example, in my Jean-Paul Sartre Being in Nothingness video, I had just taken like 5 weeks of lectures on the topic. So read the introduction, look some stuff up online. Once you've actually started reading the text and you're thinking about like, oh, how does this fit into the historical context of the time? How does this fit into like the political context? What kind of debates are people having about this book or having about this argument? One really great resource is Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I use that endlessly to help me find other essays and help me kind of understand certain topics. and the notes section is really good for just a range of philosophy texts and ideas and concepts and arguments and stuff like that. So that one's a little bit more advanced than, say, like the introduction of the text you're going to be reading, and it's a little bit more also difficult to read. It's kind of like reading a philosophy text in itself, but it's generally speaking a really great source if you're starting to think about, like, okay, how does this fit into the rest of philosophy, and how do I begin to unpack in a little more detail what's going on. So those are all things that are like extra textual that you're going to want to be thinking about before you go into the text, or maybe after you've gone into the text and you're just thinking about the historical, political, philosophical context that the text lies within. And those are all really important questions to ask yourself. But how do you actually read the text? Like, how do you just understand like what they're trying to say? You just have to read it. You just have to read it and try your best to understand what's going on. Obviously, be aware of things like, is the philosopher trying to make an argument here? How are they making this argument? Is the philosopher using a very interesting form here? Like, what language stands out to me in this text? Like, what is going on in the text? Like, you would read it just like you would read any other text. You would just be like asking yourself questions as you're reading it. And for the most part, if you come across a really difficult section, skim over it. Like, just keep going, because most likely when you come back to it after having read more of the text, when you come back to certain sections, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But you see, that wasn't, because philosophers, like I said, they don't tend to be very good writers. When they start to put their thoughts onto the page, it just gets all muddled. So like, probably the best tip I can give you is just read, and read lots, and read critically, but don't get too stressed about when you don't understand something. I feel like we think about people who understand philosophy, or like philosophy lecturers, or people who make videos about philosophy, like, we think that they understand everything that's going on, and they really, really, really don't. They are doing their best. They're interpreting what they're reading. They have probably read a lot more than you. Like, in terms of your lecturers, they probably read a lot of different branches of philosophy. Maybe they understand the history more, and so it's helping them understand what's going on in this specific text. So in the case of like being in nothingness, if you've read Hegel, if you've read Kierkegaard, you're probably going to understand Sartre much more than if you haven't read Hegel or Kierkegaard. So I don't know, like, you've just got to do your best, and yeah, just kind of try to find an edition of the text that is reputable, something like Oxford or Cambridge, where you're going to have really good notes, really good references, something like Penguin's Classics. Try to read around the topic. Like, once you've gotten a taste of the original source, like, go and look for other people who are talking about it. Go and find videos on YouTube or online lectures, or just articles that you found that have referenced the book that you're reading, and try to construct an idea of what's going on based on everything you've read, rather than just the text. Because again, philosophy texts tend to be really inaccessible, and I think that's okay. To some extent, like, we're not supposed to understand everything, and we're not supposed to have all of our questions answered by reading. Sometimes it's good to leave with more questions. And I think the more that you read, the better you're going to get at it. In terms of like close reading, you could probably spend like a month deconstructing one paragraph that Kant wrote, and you could probably like read Camus and feel like you understood everything, and then like go back and read it again and be like, oh my god, I never saw this thing, or like maybe he's saying something else with this metaphor. I think philosophy lends itself well to being read multiple times, to being read through different focal lenses. Like, think about form, think about argument, think about history and politics, and like the context that it's coming from, and read it again and again, and don't feel like you have to understand everything on your first reading or your second reading or your third reading. Like, just spend time away from the text thinking about what's going on, thinking about the questions that are asked. When Descartes asks you to close your eyes and imagine that, the external world doesn't exist, freaking close your eyes and imagine. A lot of the time, what philosophy is trying to do, it's trying to get you to think for yourself. It's not trying to get you to like absorb knowledge or reach a conclusion. Like a lot of the time it's trying to break down your pre-existing ideas and allow you to come up with something that's either more rational or more intuitive or more grounded in something. And a lot of the time philosophy has bias. It has a huge amount of bias. And the philosopher is not a solely rational being. So they're really trying to get you to believe something. It would serve you to question, what is this philosopher trying to get me to believe? And do I believe it? And is this a convincing way to do it? Think about it and spend time thinking. And then once you've thought about it for a while, once you've read it a few times, maybe one time you just skimmed through it and you looked at all of the different areas and you picked out stuff that stood out to you. And then the second time you like went in deeper and you started to read it line for line and you started to like pause and think about things. Once you've familiarized yourself with the text, take some time away from it and start talking to people about it. Start asking your friends and your family, start reaching out to people online and having discussions with them on specific arguments or specific ideas that you've had that have been inspired by some of the philosophy you've been reading. Yeah, so that's about all I have to say. Let me know if you have any other questions on philosophy that you might want answered and I'll give it a shot. I hope this was helpful to you and thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon.